Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and I got to co-host the latest Diablo 4 developer livestream update. Blizzard invited me to come play the game for a few days, talk to devs, and then co-host the stream and ask some questions, shed some insight into my experiences. Adam Fletcher would typically host these updates, so I was there to be the relief. I was there to be the Rhykker to Adam's Picard. So in this video, I'm going to talk about that, my experiences with playing the game. So as I dive now into that, what's it like to play Diablo 4 Endgame? I'm just going to say that this video will be more conversational, more live stream-like, a little less edited than my regular videos, less edited, less produced, less scripted than my regular videos. So first off, I was given a suite of endgame characters to play. I got to play every class. The characters they had set up for me ranged in level from 45 to 75, and jumping in, the first thing that I wanted to do was take that level 45 rogue and go do the Capstone dungeon. So to clarify, you finish the campaign, after that point you can unlock the full suite of endgame content via completing your first Capstone dungeon. That's how you unlock the third world tier nightmare. But this dungeon is level 50. The monsters will not scale down to your level. So I'm assuming they gave me a 45 character because maybe that's the level I could expect to be when I finish the campaign, and if I want to go dive straight into that Capstone dungeon. I should say that the gear that I was given was, the character was pretty well geared. Again, I was playing a rogue. It was my favorite class going into this whole event. There was a synergistic build put together, and as soon as I go into that Capstone dungeon, I'm like, whoa, alright, this is significantly more challenging than I expected. It's taking long to kill monsters, and as I progressed my way through, I started to reach a point where I'm fighting these champion monsters, and they kicked my butt. I died, and like I said on the stream, I'm one of those people that was saying, veteran is too easy, can we increase the challenge of veteran? My understanding is the Capstone dungeon is intended to be reflective of nightmare difficulty. Now, what I should have done at that point, or what I should have done instantly, was realize, okay, I should go power up before tackling this. The game is telling me, you're not good enough, but I treated it like it was Dark Souls. I really wanted to unlock nightmare difficulty, so I figured, okay, 45, I should be able to do this if I muscle through. I rode the struggle bus for far too long, I died far too many times, but I made it past those elites onto, I don't want to give spoilers here, I'll just say there was a boss fight after that, and I had to learn the mechanics. Altogether, I had to go back, I had to do some upgrades. I changed my build a lot, I re-specialized a lot into single target damage. This was even before, just to handle the elites. I actually went back to town and I crafted, fully upgraded all of my gear. I didn't change the gear that I had, but I used the crafting system to upgrade the gear to its max to be able to put out enough damage to actually take down the boss fight. So overall, I would say that it's a gear check and a skill check. Now, I'm not a pro player. I am, I'd say maybe I'm above average. If you look at the grand scale of all players that play, sure, I'm above average, but I am nowhere near a super skilled player. In the beta, I hardly died. I pretty much only died against Ashava, just to give you some ballpark of, I'm not total garbage, but I'm sure that there will be pro-level players that will be able to handle that encounter with either fewer deaths or no deaths. But again, if you're hardcore, I would not just waltz in casually. And I think that level difference as well really makes a difference, because my next Capstone dungeon experience, the second one to unlock the highest difficulty tier, I believe that's at 75, I was the same level as the dungeon. And that one went so much better. Despite it being the higher tier Capstone dungeon, I was of the correct level. The initial part, I'll say I breezed through, but then the boss fight, that was a big challenge again. I overcame it, but I died multiple times. Again, I needed to learn the boss mechanics to understand, okay, when am I getting one shot here? I had to change up my build a bit to be able to survive one shots. And by the way, the respecking, while I didn't do full respecs, I respect quite a bit. You generate gold rather rapidly. Can you do full respecs constantly throughout the day? No, but you could afford to respec quite a bit. Even at level 75, I was respecking things, I was earning back the gold. It wasn't a big deal, but again, I wasn't doing full respecs. I was redoing some Paragon nodes. I think I respec a whole Paragon board. I changed up some skills, but I didn't completely alter my build. But yeah, I had to spec more into survivability to just sustain the fight. I had to learn to better play my build. That's another thing as well, right? I'm jumping in there with a build that I've not played before, so I'm learning how it works. I'm learning how the mechanics of the build work. I'm learning how the mechanics of the fight work. And again, I would almost advise a hardcore player, maybe just try softcore first, just to know what you're up against. I'm going to be super impressed with all you hardcore players who are going to, on your first go, survive all these fights. In general, things are well telegraphed, but it's a skill check. You're going to have split seconds to react to what you're seeing. And if you're not spec'd for survivability, there will be one-shots. At that point, I was playing a sorcerer, and I basically changed my build around to generate shields every time I used a cooldown, and I was timing my skills in cadence with the boss's attacks to ensure that I always had a shield up whenever one of his attacks were coming, because I had a lot of difficulty dodging some of the boss attacks. And again, if you're off by that fraction of a second, bam, it was enough damage to one-shot me if I didn't have my shield up. So again, I wiped against that boss multiple times, but it felt so good to overcome the challenge and then unlock that highest tier difficulty. I would say that the Capstone is on average more difficult than the average content of that world tier. That is, if you're just out, in the open world, it's not like everything there is going to be as challenging as the Capstone. That was another reason that I was trying to really muscle through to unlock it, because better loot drops in the next world tier, and that loot is then going to start powering you up more. Now, to clarify, you don't need to even do your first Capstone dungeon to start doing endgame content. You just only get access to Nightmare dungeons and Helltide once you are in the World Tier 3 Nightmare. Before that, though, you could be doing the Whispers of the Dead. That's typically how you would get your first Nightmare sigils. So Nightmare sigils are used to open Nightmare dungeons. You get your first of those via the bounties, the Tree of Whispers. In my case, I was given characters that had a full inventory of Nightmare sigils, so that I didn't have to farm that stuff up. So Nightmare dungeons will be a core part of the endgame loop. You're going to start again by getting your first Nightmare sigils. They're going to be like the tier 1 ones. They have different tiers of escalating difficulty. You get your first via the Tree of Whispers. Then after that, once you are inside a Nightmare dungeon, you can get other sigils to drop. That'll be for higher tiers. So I'm running a tier 1, then inside maybe I'll get a tier 2 or whatever, some higher tier, and it goes on and on. And that's generally how you're going to continue to farm your Nightmare sigils. If at some point you're unhappy with the sigils that you have, you can break them down into crafting materials and craft your own Nightmare sigils at the Occultist. This could be either because you want higher tier ones, so you're gobbling down your lower tier ones to get higher tier ones, or you, I don't know, you hate the map, you hate the dungeon, or you don't like the affixes that roll, because there's randomization of the affixes that roll on those Nightmare sigils. Now, the sigils come in, I'm going to say tiers again. There's Nightmare sigils, and then there are Torment Nightmare sigils. That's the main distinction. In the Nightmare tier 1s, you can die up to 12 times before you fail, and then in the highest tier 1, again, I'll call them the Torment tier, I don't know what the proper term is, if there is one, you can only die 4 times. And yes, all the hardcore players are, insulting us right now. I get it. So you're farming Nightmare dungeons in order to get more sigils to run more, and higher level Nightmare dungeons to get more higher level loot. And also the main thing at the end of a Nightmare dungeon is you're going to level up your glyphs. Glyphs are things that you insert into your Paragon tree. They're some of the most powerful things, in fact, once leveled up sufficiently, that you'll have in your Paragon tree. So a core part of increasing your character's power will come from leveling up your glyphs. Finding glyphs, first off. Finding glyphs, finding the right glyphs for your build, and leveling them up. You can argue that it's similar to legendary gems in Diablo 3, but there's more complexity to it because you gotta be inserting the glyphs into the Paragon board and in a slot that is meaningful. We'll talk more about glyphs in a bit here when we talk about the Paragon boards. Again, my main focus in playing the game was to understand what am I going to be doing every day in Diablo 4? What is the experience going to be? Why am I doing the different activities that are available to me? Now, on average, the difficulty in Nightmare Dungeons, not nearly the same as in the Capstone dungeons. Capstone is definitely far more challenging. But Nightmare Dungeons as well, I mean, you effectively get to make them as challenging as you want, given that you could unlock higher and higher Nightmare sigils. So at baseline, the baseline sigils are easy enough to run. And if you want to be farming more rapidly and more efficiently, then you can run lower tier sigils. But again, you're rewarded because you only have a finite number of resources of these sigils. You are rewarded for not just doing the easiest content over and over, but rather for, I guess, tackling the content that you can efficiently handle. Efficiently, I suppose, an asterisk, as we figure out what efficiently means in this game. In Diablo 3, efficiently means 2.5 to 5 minutes. But all this to say that Nightmare Dungeons are certainly things where you don't have to be slamming your head against difficulty-wise. The most challenging things that I experienced were those Capstone dungeons. Now, one concern I have about the Nightmare Dungeons is that in the seasons, we'll probably want to do all the Nightmare Dungeons, or all the regular dungeons rather, once, but only 30 will become Nightmare Dungeons every season, and that will rotate, so there'll be different Nightmare Dungeons every season. My concern, I can already foresee people complaining like, hey, how come we could only do these 30 dungeons out of the, 115? Why can't you just let us do all 115 or however many dungeons there are in the game as Nightmare Dungeons? Again, this is something that we'll only really realize after we experience the season. We'll find out whether the 30 is enough or not, and I'm sure if it's not enough, they'll be open to increasing that number. So that pretty much covers the Nightmare Dungeons. Then there's Helltide. And Helltide is where you can target farm specific item drops. We'll explain why in a bit, as well as it's pretty much the only place that you can get certain important crafting materials. So these, the Helltide and the Nightmare Dungeons, are part of your core gameplay loop at the end. You have reason for wanting to do both of them, and there are things in each that you cannot get in the other. That said, it sounds like XP farming will not be relegated to one or the other. I asked about this, and they said monster density should kind of be the same, so it's not like in Diablo 3, for instance, where there is an activity to do that is the maximum XP farm. Asterisk, I'm sure pro gamers will find what is the most effective thing to do for XP farm, but from a design perspective, nothing is designed to be, oh, this is what you want to do to grind XP. So I think we didn't have time to really dive too much into it, but Helltide has a bunch of random events that can spawn within it that are different and distinct from the random events that naturally spawn in that zone. So Helltide is basically something that takes over an existing zone in the game. It, in addition to having the regular monsters spawn there, it starts to spawn demons. And in addition to that, Helltide specific events, I think they override the regular zone events. So there's a few different Helltide events that can spawn. I'm not going to get into spoilers there. There's also roaming boss monster encounters that you can run into. It's overall, Helltide is pretty challenging. It's not slam your face against a wall challenging, but there's a marked increase in difficulty within Helltide and outside of Helltide. And I think I could talk about this. It wasn't touched upon in the stream. Again, there was just so much to talk about and not enough time. But, well, first off, to lay the foundation. Within the Helltide, you are collecting cinders, and those cinders are used to open up different chests that are found throughout the Helltide. They spawn in random locations, so your flow of gameplay within Helltide is kill your way around, exploring to find where the different chests are. Every chest will have an icon above it showing a gear slot, like boots or two-handed weapon, and it'll show you the cinder cost to open that chest. So you're killing your way around, you're picking up cinders, and you're determining which chest do I want to open. Now and again, I think I could say this, there's one chest that's randomly within the area. I'm not sure if it always spawns, but it is not marked on the map. And it's like a super secret chest. It's some kind of uber chest. And I think typically randomly roaming around the area near said chest is some uber boss. So, high risk, high reward, beware. You're encouraged to scout around, find things. Because again, if you die in Helltide, you lose half your cinders. They don't drop on the ground, they are gone. Helltide lasts 1 hour, so my first Helltide I joined in with only 20 minutes left, so I only could farm up a certain amount of cinders. But you want to be making choices again on, alright, what gear slot am I target farming for? If you're searching for unique items, for instance, you know exactly what unique you might be hunting for. Maybe a Shaco, a Harlequin crest, rather. You're going to be looking for that, you know, okay, Helm, I got to find the Helm slot. I'm going to go for that. Or if you just have one slot that's really weak and you want to upgrade it, you can target farm for that. The odds of getting good rewards in general seems pretty good. And the spawn rate of Helltide seems to be 1 hour on, 1 hour off. So once one Helltide ends, the next one will start an hour later in another random location within the world. In the meantime, you could be doing your Nightmare dungeons, you could be doing your Whispers, you could be doing world bosses, or if you happen to spawn at the right time. Now, on the topic of the cadence of 1 hour on, 1 hour off, I will note that in general, I'm someone who likes to have full agency over what I have access to playing in a game. I don't know how big of a deal is it. I mean, especially now, the way I play, it's not a big deal to have 1 hour off, but I used to be someone who wanted to just jump into a game, play for 15 minutes when I had time during the day, and I think if I were still that kind of gamer, I would be disappointed to hear, oh, I logged in, Helltide's not available right now. Here's one less thing that I have to do. Maybe I get lucky a few days in a row and every time I log in to play, Helltide is off. I'm not sure how much of an issue it would be to just have Helltide on all the time in different zones in the game. I suppose the concern there might be that if it's always on, then people might only do Helltide. But again, I'm not sure that's really much of a problem. If people want to do something, let them do it. The way it is now, I am okay with it. I'm just concerned if we're going to pave the way for a lot of things like this in the future that are all going to be on different schedules. One thing that I started to find tedious in Lost Ark, for instance, was, okay, at this time this does this, at that time that does that. I have a whole calendar. The game literally gives you a calendar in order to keep track of upcoming things and ensure that, okay, I go to this island to do this at this time, and then I go there to do that at that time. I just want to play the game whenever I want, on my own schedule, on my own time, and not be gated out of activities based on different times. If the concern is being able to do an activity too much, I would rather have some resource that I can farm in order to partake in the activity on my schedule. So let's say a Helltide key that you unlock, and then bam, you consume it, and now a zone becomes Helltide within your instance. For argument's sake, this doesn't have to be for Helltide, but for other such events. Some people suggest that for world bosses, for instance. And that pretty much covers the core endgame gameplay loop. Now, how does that all tie into progression? Well, this is related to sacred and ancestral items. So again, you're playing on veteran or normal difficulty. You have yet to unlock World Tier 3. You're only getting normal items. You're going to be fully decked out in legendaries probably by the time you finish the campaign. Otherwise, before completing your first Capstone dungeon, you'll likely fill in all those slots. 2 legendaries, hopefully legendaries that are helping your build. You might even be leveling up that gear at the blacksmith to make that gear more powerful, but there is basically a finite amount of power that you can get from items below World Tier 3. Once you unlock World Tier 3, then bam, sacred items can start dropping. These items are going to be on average better than the gear you've been able to find up to this point. And this is when the gear stops leveling with you. You can get a drop that might be good all the way through level 70. So it's a little bit similar to Diablo 2. Once you complete normal, then you start playing on Nightmare, and now you get exceptional items that can start dropping. So again, the flow of progression is going to be, you're pretty much maxing out your normal gear by the time you unlock World Tier 3, and then you're going to start getting upgrades again, and as you're progressing your way up to about level 70-75 to get World Tier 3 unlocked, which again, I'm sure like super pro players will probably unlock it at higher, rather lower level than the rest of us. Mind you, they'll also be farming XP far more efficiently than the rest of us, so who knows, maybe they'll wait until the appropriate level to do it. But regardless, your flow then is sort of starting the loop all over again of gearing progression where, okay, well now you're getting your new drops you got to start looking at again. In my case, I wasn't really upgrading my gear because I was given a full suite of gear that was appropriate for my build. And so legendaries were not raining from the sky. They seemed to be dropping at an appropriate rate. I did see them, but the odds of getting a legendary that was good for my build was relatively low. So I would have to not only just find a base item that was an upgrade, I would also have to find a legendary essence to extract and put onto it, or otherwise just an item that was altogether really strong. Another thing I should clarify, the affixes on the gear that I had were also well suited for my build. So now I was in a position where the items that are dropping, if they're not rolling, you know, a bunch of good affixes, then it's a lot harder to replace just because some of the numbers are bigger when I'm losing some very important affixes on my gear, such as plus to skills. You do have a certain amount of agency in re-rolling that one property if you bring an item to the mystic or whatever the character is called that lets you enchant an item and re-roll one property. But nonetheless, I was going from a build that pretty much had all the properties that were useful to me to then needing to find items that would have only one bad property that I can then re-roll into something good. I anticipate this to not be the case for most people. I doubt by the end of normal or veteran or whatever difficulty, I doubt you'll be in a position where your gear is perfect, and so it should be a lot easier to find replacements and gear upgrades as you move into World Tier 3. You will, however, start to face some decisions on, ooh, well, this is a much better weapon, I'm dealing a lot more damage, but I would lose a certain legendary power because I'm going to be swapping out this legendary weapon for a rare weapon. In the case of a weapon, I think the damage is generally worth it, depending on what that legendary affix is going to be. And this is also now when unique items can start dropping at World Tier 3. Now, then once you unlock World Tier 4, this cycle effectively repeats itself. Now you're unlocking the highest tier, the ancestral items, and again, probably by the time you're there, your gear is in pretty good shape, and you'll now be able to start upgrading it once again. But I imagine throughout World Tier 3, it's not that all of your gear is instantly garbage. It's not like your World Tier 1 gear is, you just toss it all out and pick up everything and it's all upgrades. You will be holding on to stuff. Maybe there's going to be a legendary affix that you can't find again, so you need to hold on to a certain item that's key to your build. And similarly, moving into World Tier 4, maybe there's going to be some unique you found in World Tier 3 at level, 51 that you don't want to get rid of. Maybe that's your GG item for the rest of, all the way up to level 100. You might have a few gear slots that you're going to be holding on to because, I got these really good rolls. And yeah, even though technically better items are dropping, it's not like there's such a thing as gear score that is more than just a number. It's not like a higher level item is inherently superior than a lower level item. Affixes will matter. It's just that the higher tier items, the ancestral items, can roll higher stats. Also, some uniques are going to be far rarer than others, is another thing to bear in mind. Now, I didn't get to experience this because it's only something that comes from months of playing the game, but it does sound like this is the god drop that I've always been hoping for. You have some items that are super rare, or at least more rare than all the other items, such that when you get one, you feel so awesome to have found it. This is something that I was hoping for D4, sounds like it should be in the game. Alright, now for the Paragon boards. I was someone who, when I first saw the Paragon boards, I guess a while ago, I wasn't terribly impressed with them. I just sort of had the idea that, okay, it's going to be a board with some random, selection of pseudo-random attributes, lots of +2 basic stats, and then you're going to have that legendary node that is probably going to be the only real interesting thing on the Paragon board. But I had my eyes opened when I saw the assortment. I think every class gets, I want to say 7 to 8 Paragon boards. They are all themed around that central legendary power. And that's the part that made them really interesting to me. I started to now, it completely changed my perspective on Paragon boards. I started to think of it more like, it's almost like an Ascendancy class in PoE, or a Prestige class in Dungeons & Dragons, or, Last Epoch has its specialization class as well, sort of thing. Not quite to that extent, because you can select eventually multiple boards, but on the Necromancer, for instance, okay, here's a board that is for the ultimate minion Necromancer. So that central legendary node does something very powerful. I think on average, the legendary powers on the Paragon board are more powerful than legendary affixes. So this is something significant. By the way, the legendary power or unique power on a unique item is a couple times. It's some multiplier on average more powerful than a legendary power. Just to put some sense of scale in there. So you have, in order of increasing power, I believe you have your basic legendary powers, you have your Paragon board legendary node, and then you have your unique affix or unique legendary power. That would be the most powerful of the three, on average. But going back to the Paragon board, so again, you have your Summoner Necromancer. That legendary power is something that is comparable to, in design, a legendary power on an item, but a little bit more powerful. And then you have your rare and your magic nodes that are thematically tied in. So the least interesting thing on the Paragon board is just the basic nodes, where it's just +2 different stats. And there's no such thing as main stat in D4. You could want different stats on your character for different reasons, whether you're going for more crit, or whether you're going for more resource generation, or what have you. Sometimes even your glyphs will make you want to build for a certain stat, because there are mechanics within the Paragon board that turn on or activate based on how much of a certain stat you have. So you might find yourself building a stat for the sole purpose of unlocking a better effect on the Paragon board. From a design perspective, this was the idea of, okay, in D2, for instance, there are certain items that you cannot equip unless you have X strength. They wanted to take that same concept, but make it less punishing and move it elsewhere. So they have it on the Paragon board where, well, if you don't have this amount of a certain affix, you won't get this more powerful bonus effect. So to use as an example, on the Paragon board for the ultimate Summoner Necro, the legendary power could be something like your minions deal 10% more damage for each minion type you have, thereby encouraging you to use all the different minions and rewarding you for doing so. Then your individual rare nodes could be stuff like plus 15% damage to Skeletal Mage. And then the blue nodes could be something like plus 5% to minion armor. But they're basically all themed, again, outside of the regular nodes, they're all themed around the central theme and fantasy of the Paragon board. Now, one issue with the Paragon boards is you can't plan ahead. There's currently no planner built into the game. So once you unlock the Paragon boards, well, now you might want to completely change your build, or otherwise, I guess what you would do is you would see what build am I running now, which Paragon board best fits the playstyle that I'm going for. Alternatively, you might say, oh dang, this is a really powerful Paragon board, or now that you're seeing them all, you might decide, okay, I want to combine these and I'll completely respec my build around the Paragon board. Overall, I definitely hope that at some point they can add into the game a Paragon board planner. I'm sure that there will be external resources, websites that people can go to in order to do this planning. I just like when things are available to us within the game. The less you need to tab out or have a second monitor up to do things, I think in general empowers players, because not everyone is going to go do that. Not everyone will go to these other websites and use build planners and whatnot. I feel quality of life stuff should be in the game itself and not have to come from the community. I love community resources, don't get me wrong. I always love when the community comes and adds to the game, but I think a lot of that stuff generally should be in the game by itself. One of the issues is that you can't look at what the Paragon boards are unless you are currently at a gate node. That's one of the nodes that'll connect to a new Paragon board, so it just makes it more difficult to plan when you can't be just bringing up a menu that shows you the Paragon boards, unless you are literally in the process of adding a point to unlock a new Paragon board. But overall, I was someone who previously didn't think the Paragon system was that interesting until now I got a more holistic look at the Paragon system, and now I find it far more interesting. So again, I got to play all 5 classes. Going into the week, my order of preference of the classes: Rogue was my favorite, followed by Necromancer, Sorcerer, Barbarian, and Druid and dead last, with the Barbarian and the Druid being classes that I wasn't crazy about, and the other 3 being classes that I enjoyed and would want to play. I think that order has completely reversed now. I still believe I'm going to start with a Rogue simply because Rogues have super mobility, but that mobility becomes less meaningful when the content becomes more challenging. Mobility is always important for evading damage, but hypermobility lets you get more rapidly from quest to quest, so I think it's going to be the fastest to go through the campaign, but you start dropping a lot of those mobility powers when you're facing higher difficulty things in order to deal more damage or have more damage mitigation. So my 45 character was my rogue. That might be why that was my least favorite, just because I really slammed my head against the wall difficulty-wise. My favorite was, I played two different druid builds. My favorite was the permanent werewolf stormcaster druid. It felt so good. I was never at resource loss. The build just gelled. Now, I need to stress, I was given fully synergized items and toolkits. These were fully put together and thought through builds. So what is the experience with just random gear on and a random build? I can't speak to that, but I just love the gameplay flow of that druid build. It felt so smooth, which was in stark contrast to my experience in the beta. And then my second favorite was a barbarian. It was a berserking build. It all revolved around benefiting from berserking as much as possible and buffing berserking, and again, it felt really good to play, really smooth. I'm not crazy about melee in general, so it was a step down from the druid with regards to just what I enjoy playing, but the build felt good. Then my third remained the sorcerer. I played a lightning build. And to clarify, the build that I was playing has all the changes that they listed from the last patch that we covered last week. So it wasn't the same, overpowered lightning sorceress that we had in the beta. Yeah, sorcerer remained as my number 3. And then my number 4 was the necromancer. The necromancer, I was given it was a blood army build. And so it was this combination of using Blood Lance while also having minions. It was a pet build that also had me doing some of the active damage. Now, nerfs were made to minion survivability. I definitely felt that. My minions pretty much only died against a Shava back in the beta. They otherwise were almost always up. Now my minions were dying quite regularly. I was having to resummon them. I'm not going to say constantly, but regularly as I'm going through. I would say that I never really reached a scenario where I was out of corpses. Or, that's not fair to say, no. I would be out of corpses sometimes, but I had a lot of means of generating corpses. So sometimes I wasn't at full minions. I had maybe a couple out, but on average, I was generating enough corpses at a regular enough rate to be replenishing my army. Minions, or Minion Necromancer, will remain non-targetable, as in it's Diablo 2 style where your minions just go out and do whatever they want, as opposed to Diablo 3 style where you can point to an enemy and your minions will target that enemy. That's not my preferred playstyle, but that's the decision they wanted to go with. There are people that like dumb minions that'll just go do their own thing, and again, not my preference, so I don't really see myself going Summoner Necro. I really like that ability to point at an enemy and say, please attack this. That said, it's not that I had a lack of things to do. I could still be, again, I had my Blood Lance, so I was still actively doing quite a bit of stuff during the combat. I'm just not fond of the haphazard nature of minions just being this chaotic force that are doing whatever they want and not being able to target something in priority. Because Diablo 4 is a game where you often do want to be targeting things in priority. So I could imagine on a full minion build where you have no damage yourself, maybe a blood cyst is going to appear on screen and you just gotta hope and pray that your minions are going to go attack it before it explodes and kills you. It would be cool if maybe they could at least add a legendary power or a unique somewhere that lets you choose to target. Maybe it'll do it that once you're at max minions, instead of summoning a skeletal priest, it'll send your minions to attack, and it doesn't have to be the zoom mode like in Diablo 3 where your skeletons all instantly surge over, but just, target this and they meander over and priority take down that target before any other. So I think that pretty much covers the gameplay portion here. I'll say if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll try to answer, or come by my Twitch streams and we can have live discussions about things. Overall, I definitely gained a more robust understanding of what are we going to be doing day in, day out in Diablo 4. Overall, I had a great time. I'm glad I got to ask your most upvoted questions, and soon enough the game will release and you'll have a lot of these questions answered for yourself. So that's gonna wrap up this overly long and rambling video, as I am still recovering from my travels, but I'm gonna thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.